A quick update, very brief update really on the EX Space itself. We've been heads down, as you'll know, for many months now, developing our platform, a membership-based learning community where we can come together and learn and collaborate and share resources and ideas around employee experience and engagement. We've got some amazing content, which we're just finalising and road testing now. We're putting to bed our programs of webinars and content for the rest of the year. And we're doing final kind of technical tweaks, really. So all being well, we should be on target to launch in the next about 4 to 6 weeks. So I know it's taken a while. It will be worth it, I promise. But keep a lookout. We'll be launching member offers and things like that over the coming weeks as well. So keep your eyes peeled, but it's coming down the line and we're very excited about it. So moving on to today's topic, employee networks and champions. As a title, it's not the most exciting title, but actually this is a subject I really love. I've been working in this area and helping clients over many years to shape up networks of various sorts. And it's a fascinating theme, and it's a hugely important topic, actually, when you think about this from an EX and an engagement perspective, if not something more specific like a comms perspective as well. So as Emma will outline in a little bit more detail, you know, it's great. They're very effective at helping make change stick. So when it comes to change initiatives, change communication, these are a very powerful way to embed and sustain change. They're great for creating great experiences and of course for unlocking employee engagement. And there's a bunch of terms that are used, and I'm sure we'll use all these terms over the course of the next hour. Influencers, ambassadors, advocates, champions, perhaps even followers might be used within this context. And we'll try and unpack the subtle differences between each of those, actually, and we'll try and unpack some of that as we go. But why does it matter? Why sacrifice a lunch hour to talk about this today? I think a number of things. First of all, social dynamics, the nature of trust, right? When we all book our holidays now, what do? We go on TripAdvisor. We look at what normal people, what people like us say and think about the resorts we're planning to visit. And often we make our decision based on that. So there's trust, there's the kind of social dynamic that's going on. Change is behavioral, and people change when they see other people changing, not when they're necessarily told to change. It ensures initiatives are owned and shaped. So there's something about democracy here almost, that initiatives are owned and shaped by the people that they're most impacted by employees or representative group of employees, rather than just those at the very top of the organization. Networks can be amazingly powerful at supporting diversity and inclusion as well, giving all sorts of groups a voice and ensuring that they're represented in decision-making and implementation of programs. Networks are sustainable as well, where we've seen these really work. They live a life beyond their initial purpose. They're often brought in to support a particular initiative, but they carry on, they find new purpose and new meaning, and the best ones become part and parcel of the life of the business itself over many, many years. Employee networks come in all shapes and sizes. They can be formal or informal. They can have explicit role descriptions and comprehensive training, for instance, at one end, or they can be much looser and kind of less guided. They can comprise people who are sought out, who are actively selected by a group, or they can be self-selecting. So you can have people who put their hand up and volunteer to be part of an employee network. And there's no one right way of doing this. What's right for one organisation will be wrong for another. So many shapes and sizes, and what we're joined today by 3 great in-house practitioners. And I think, you know, this is where it gets really exciting, is to look at how they've used employee networks in very different ways and in very different contexts, and to see what we can learn from them. We'll introduce them more fully later on. But we have Lucy from a tech business called Brain in Hand, We have Karen from the Ministry of Justice, and we have Ruth from the Crown Prosecution Service. So we must all be on our best behaviour today. Before we hand over to Emma for the meet for today's session, let's do a quick poll, and it's a really simple one. Katie will trigger that now for you to answer the question. One simple question or statement. I tend to be most influenced by which of those? Authority figures, the media, my friends and family, or people like me? Just take a second to consider that and then click your answer and we'll have a look at the results.
Thank you, Lee. Yeah, they're coming in thick and fast. Still a couple of people to complete it. Excellent. Very interesting results. I can see it all moving in front of me. So very interesting. Okay, I'm going to share the results with you. So I love the fact that we have a 0% on the media these days. That gives me great confidence, actually. So yes, on that. 7% say authority figures. The majority, I mean, overwhelming majority, are either friends and family or people like me. And I guess you could probably put some of those together, couldn't you? Probably some overlap there. So yeah, really, really telling there. And
yeah, it's fascinating. And it, again, you know, we see this in things like the Edelman Trust Barometer that's published every year. The nature of trust has really shifted over the last decade or so, from authority figures, from the media, the government, all of that machinery, to actually people like me and friends and contacts and acquaintances. So yeah, this definitely plays out what we're seeing elsewhere. Right, without further ado, Emma, over to you for the science behind this.
Thanks, Lee. Yeah, I'll unpack that finding in just a second. It probably won't surprise you to hear there's some neuroscience behind it. And in the world of influences, we kind of know that, you know, we do tend to listen to people like us, friends and family. So let's kind of get into a little bit of background on this topic. So we're actually inspired to run the session today by a mutual friend, for someone that I met at the same time that I met Karen, a great guy called Rob Neal, who's kind of leading on this kind of a networks day that happened a few weeks ago when we weren't kind of able to run the webinar then. So we thought we'd launch a webinar on Networks Day and you know, off the back of that, really. So what do we mean by an employee network or champions? So it's really about giving responsibility and power to a diverse and representative group of employees. So much more about using those influencers within an organization rather than relying on the people that kind of just have the influence by title. And as Lee said, you know, something that the both of us have used for many, many years. And I know when I first started working with the MOJ, when I first started People Lab, you know, the reason I started working with the MOJ was to work with their networks, their employee engagement network all those years ago that Karen was part of, where Karen and I first met. And it's a tactic that I've used for many years and had really, not me personally, but I've seen the amazing impact and success that you have when you kind of use this tactic. So we're going to dig into it a little bit more now. Why bother using them? As I said, there's a load of kind of psychology and evidence base that sits behind the power of a network or using these kind of influencers or champions. First of all, you know, really links into the employee engagement enablers, which David McLeod and Nita Clark first penned at the end of the sort of noughties. So I think about 2009, their report to government talked about the role of employee voice, and I added a fifth enabler, involvement. So we know that being able to be involved in the success of an organization, having a voice, are critical to facilitate engagement, and having a group of networks or champions really helps to kind of dial up those enablers. There's something around belonging as well. So again, lots of psychology behind this. I haven't got time to go into it all today, but if you're interested, drop me a line. But you know, we are hardwired to be social, whether it's being social online or in person. So, you know, having these kind of connectors, these influencers, these nodes, sometimes people call them nodes if you like, they help to build connection across the organization in a much more authentic and real world way. I'll talk about that in just a second. The idea of how we think kind of change happens across an organization, it is not really the way it happens in the wild, if you like. So really having kind of a group of, you know, a network group of champions, influencers, advocates, whatever you want to call them, is much more kind of mimicking how we naturally kind of connect outside of work. Also contribute to things like well-being, EDI support. So there's a lot of kind of threads that come into that belonging title there. And it also links to something called viral change, which I'll talk about here in a second. So, sorry, I'll talk to you about in a second, which was first penned by Leandro Herrero. Huge fan of his work. And again, he sort of really taps into this, this idea that the way that we think change happens in an organization traditionally, kind of starting from the top and cascading down, it's not really how it happens in the wild. So lots of kind of psychology and neuroscience to support using a network of influencers, champions, whatever you want to call them, as a great tactic for a good experience and unlocking engagements. But just going back to that, that question we asked you at the beginning, Lee's already mentioned the Edelman Trust Barometer. And we know the nature of trust has changed massively over the years. In fact, nobody said they trust the media, just says it all. I think even a few years ago, we would have had a few people saying they trust the media, but now, no. And we've seen the rise of this social media influencer. I mean, Instagram now, you know, it's actually a job, isn't it? To be you know, a content creator or an influencer on Instagram, and now more latterly on TikTok. And this is because of something called the popularity bias. So we have around, well, over 140 different cognitive biases, which really kind of are shortcuts for our brain. So we don't have to kind of evaluate everything from the ground up when anything happens to us. It's kind of a way of our brains being efficient and effective. And we talk about biases a lot because they can get in the way, but sometimes they can be quite useful as well, especially for people like us that are designing experiences and looking to kind of deliver on engagement. We can use these biases to our advantage. So the popularity bias is really about us really connecting with people like us, so friends and family and people like us. And if we find that people like us are doing something or advocating for something, then we're more likely to do it ourselves, which is why, I mean, I am literally a marketing man's dream. You know, I'm on Instagram, and one of the people I follow brings out a new kind of cream to make you look 10 years younger, and it's already in my inbox, you know, my basket, and I bought it. My popularity bias is really, really high, and I'm a bit ashamed to admit that, but it's really there. And you know, a few really interesting experiments from the world of psychology. So one that you might relate to was done with towels in hotels. You might have heard of this one. So we all know now there's a little card that says, hey, help the environment, reuse your towel, you know, and some of us go, yeah, I can do that. But psychologists got involved and said, well, actually, if we change the sort of the instruction a little bit, or the copy a little bit, I wonder what would happen. So they kind of did some experiments where they looked at 3 different signs. So one was a generic, you know, please reuse your towel, save the environment. One was saying most people at this hotel reuse their towel and save the environment. And the final one was saying most people that stay in this room reuse their towel and save the environment. And no surprises based on what we've talked about here, that the most effective one, significantly more people reused their towel when they were told that people in that room had reused their towel. So it's a very, very strong bias in us. And it really kind of links to being able to use biases as a force for good. You know, they're not always a bad thing. We can use them for good as well as, you know, trying to overcome some of them. And this is where, you know, networks really come into their own. We can really tap into this popularity bias to enable much more effective change across the organization. So just to bring this to life a little bit, we often think of the organization as being this kind of, you know, this org structure that's been created in PowerPoint, whatever it's been created in. That's how the organization works. So the people at the top tell the next layer down, they tell the next layer down. That's what happens in an organization. That's how change happens. We start at the top and it kind of cascades down. But in actual fact, this is an actual real life network analysis. This is much more how our organizations look. There are kind of those influencers, those nodes, those people that have a lot of kind of influence over others around them. And you could probably already have a go at drawing one of these for your own organization. You probably already know who those influencers are, those really highly networked people are. And going back to my in-house days, for sure, a lot of the PA community would sit in those influencers boxes because they were so influence, they were so powerful in their influence across the organization. So there are some very clever kind of AI programs and analytics people you can speak to if you want to run an actual network analysis for your organization. I don't have the brain to do that, but it's a really interesting and fascinating activity to go through. And again, we see this out in outside of work in the real world. There's lots of kind of network analysis of things like Facebook use and Instagram use, etc. That's how the world really operates. Well, this is good news for us thinking about setting up networks, because our networks can really mimic this. This is how change really happens. And I've just put this kind of tsunami image here just to sort of say it doesn't happen as a tsunami from the top cascading down. That is not how change happens. It's much more of a kind of a butterfly effect. So those of you that kind of remember chaos theory that was big in the 90s, I'm showing my age here, this idea that a butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil and we get rain in Hastings in the UK, this idea of viral change. So I mentioned the work of Leandro Herrera before. This is a brilliant book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And Leandro kind of pulls all of these ideas that I'm talking about into one place and says, actually, viral change is a slightly unfortunate name now, viral, isn't it, after the last 3 years we've been through, but you get the idea. Viral change is actually really what we need to be tapping into in organizations. It's kind of a much more effective way of making change happen. And really a couple of things, I pull out from this book. So one is about building your network of champions, and the other is about being really clear on the kind of non-negotiable behaviors that you want them to kind of adopt and role model as well. So I'll kind of go into that a little bit more. So being clear on who's in that kind of network itself, and then being clear on what the purpose of that network is. So I'll go on to that in just a second. But Katie, have we got any questions coming in so far before I go on to the kind of the how piece?
No questions as such, although Lee has put a question in the chat to the guests, to our audience. Has anyone on the call used social network analysis to identify influencers? So just
I will continue then and see if anyone's ever done that. So how do you then set up your network, your group of champions? You're going to get the slides afterwards, so don't worry if I go through this pretty quickly, because I really want to kind of get on to talking to our esteemed guests today, because they've got some real life, real world experience to share with you. I think the starting point, though, is to get really clear on the purpose of your network, and then the role and responsibility of the people that you want in that network. So what is it? What's the purpose of the network? And what is it you're trying to achieve? And one of our most popular ever downloads at People Lab has been our employee engagement champion role profile. We developed this years ago with clients, and we've developed lots of different iterations since, just to get really clear on, we're inviting people into this network. What is it that we kind of expect from them, but also what are we looking for as well? So what are the sort of people you need in that network? Because the sort of network you're building will, the purpose of that network will really, have an impact on the sorts of people you want involved in that. It's not always going to be the same people every time, despite their amount of influence and credibility. So have a think about that. And in the slides, we have shared with you here an example of a role profile for an employee engagement champion. So it kind of talks about what's the purpose of the role, what are we here to do, what are we delivering, and what is it we need from you. And that's really helpful for people to get a real sense of, should I belong in this network? Should I be part of this group of champions, or is it something that I'm going to actually say, I'm not the right person to do that? Recruiting members. So there's lots of different ways that you can build your network. You could do a social network analysis and pull out your influencers and see who they are. I guess this is one of the biggest questions we're asked, actually, we're asked, and also one of the areas we spend quite a bit of time talking about when we're working with clients to help them build their network. The networks we build tend to be around facilitating engagement, facilitating experiences, but you can build a network around anything, right? So we spent a lot of time thinking about what's the best way to do this. And there are pros and cons to any way you choose. I mean, the easiest way is just say, hey, we're building a network and we want people to join, and here's the role profile, or here's something a bit shorter and sweeter that says this is what the network's about, and these are the sorts of people we're looking for. Do you want to come and join us? And that will get you so far. But the obvious downside of that is you might not end up with the group that you would ideally like. So often it's quite useful to use kind of some or all of these different ways of recruiting your members. So advertising is good, but there might be people that you think would be really useful to have in that network that haven't put themselves forward. We've used an election-based approach with previous organisations. I think, Katie, forgive me if I'm wrong, we did this with, was it Canal River Trust? We did this one. Can't remember now. But we've used this a few times where we've actually asked people to kind of put themselves forward, and then we've had other employees decide who's joining that group. So very democratic, but not without its downsides, its challenges. It's a bit, you know, disheartening if you put yourself forward, you don't get elected. But if communicated in the right way, that can be a really effective way to kind of build that group. Yeah, so volunteers, I've talked about that already. Asking teams and business units to put forward their own representative, picking people yourselves. There's lots of different ways to do this. And we tend to find that, as I said, a kind of a mix of all of these works quite well. So making it quite an inclusive process is great, but also kind of tapping a few people on the shoulder can work really well too, because you probably know who you want in this group. And you know, we've done lots of kind of quite creative campaigns over the years. So it is an approach. I mean, I use this approach before I even started People Lab when I was in-house for 10 years. I, you know, always used kind of networks. I first used actually EDF when we had a kind of a well-being network that's called Smile. And I found out recently that we started that in about year 2000. I found out probably only about 3 or 4 years ago that it had just been disbanded. So it lasted for years. There's lots of really creative ways you can get people involved. So we've seen kind of Dragon Den style pitches. We've asked sometimes employees to send a video in, explain why they want to join. So you can have some fun with it, and you know, whatever works for your organization, you have some real fun with it and get quite creative with it as well. Establishing the purpose, so absolutely critical, get really clear before you recruit what the purpose is, but then revisit that purpose once you've got the group in place and say, does this kind of feel right? What's the point of us? Why are we here? What are we going to do? We're going to talk a little bit about do's and don'ts today, but I think where I've seen groups and networks really kind of excel and power forwards and just kind of get on with it is where there's been a really, really clear ask of them, and they're really clear on what it is they need to do. It hasn't just been a kind of a vague, well, you know, just go out and talk to people about engagement. It's like, what? How do I do that? What do I do? Where there's a real clear ask, that's where I've really seen network groups fly. And then developing the team as well. So what we've found has worked over the years really well is, yeah, get them set up, give them a really clear purpose, agree exactly what they're going to do in the first sort of 6 months. So it's, you know, non-negotiable really, going back to Leandro Herrero, non-negotiable what they're going to do. But also working with different groups of networks, you very, very quickly unearth kind of their development needs. And let's face it, for a lot of these people, it might be the first time they've ever done anything like this. So, for example, with one of the companies we work with, we upskilled the group on facilitation skills, how to facilitate workshops, overcoming conflict resolution, getting buy-in, influencing, some of those sort of softer skills. And it's landed really well when we've invested in the development of the groups of networks that we've been working with. That's landed really well. So it will become clear very quickly as you work with your network what those development needs are, and just giving them that kind of extra bit of support, upskill can land really well, and again contribute to their engagement as well. So they feel like experts of whatever it is you're asking them to be a network in. In our case, it's often employee engagement, employee experience. So we spend quite a bit of time giving them a kind of bit of an employee engagement 101. So they kind of can talk quite credibly about engagement, and they can answer those difficult questions where people sort of say, oh, isn't it all a bit fluffy? They can go, actually, no, share some of the neuroscience. We kind of really invest in them to make sure they've got what they need. Define the success criteria. It's a bit of a, an obvious one, but right at the start, just being really clear about, when we're looking back in 2 years' time and we're saying this has been a really great experience, what's that look like? What's that feel like? How will we know we've been successful? And how will we be able to demonstrate that to our senior exec team or senior managers when they're questioning the amount of time that it takes for people to be part of a network, and they're saying, they're not doing the day job enough, and we've kind of negotiated that, but we still get those people coming forward and saying, why are we doing this? How are we going to be able to really demonstrate to them the value of this network? So that's worth thinking about, right at the outset. And then rewarding and recognizing the team. We need to make sure they feel valued. Often this is a side of the desk job, or a certain amount of hours a week they have to kind of put into this, and they need to feel they're getting something back, that they above and beyond the kind of development need. We need to kind of champion them, celebrate them, big them up. And again, we've done things like getting champions in front of the executive team to share the work they're doing, and these are people that often would not normally have that kind of exposure. We've seen people be promoted as a result of being a part of a networks team because they're just developing new skills, or perhaps they're getting to know different parts of the business. So not just the kind of the obvious celebrations, but there are other ways of kind of rewarding and recognizing the team as well. So got a few ideas on there that you can have a look at. But just taking time out to really thank them for the job they're doing, because when you get a good group of champions or a good network, like with the example of the Smile network from EDF Energy from all those years ago, they really do make a huge difference to the organization in terms of the experience and the engagement. Okay, so I have talked enough now. So I'm gonna hand over to Katie and Lee to introduce our guests. But before I do that, are there any questions so far, Katie? Or any comments coming through?
Not so far, but just a good reminder for anyone that has any comments or questions, pop them into the chat and we'll make sure we come back to them.
Cool.
Okay.
And our esteemed guests.
Yes, so as Lee mentioned at the beginning, we have 3 very special guests with us today, all of whom have either been clients or have become friends and part of the family, if you like, over the years. So with us today, we have Lucy, who is People Director at Brain in Hand. And if you're not familiar with Brain in Hand, they are a tech for good business. They offer a digital self-management system combining practical human support and simple technology to help people live more independently. We also have Karen, who is Head of Engagement and Wellbeing at Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service, part of the MOJ, and Ruth, who is the Chair of the Carers Network at CPS. So, Lucy, let's start with you. So, you've been using an employee network recently to help develop and drive culture change, particularly around your employee values. So can you tell us a little bit about the Values Champions and sort of who they are and what they do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Casey, and lovely to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. So I joined Brain in Hand just over a year ago as Head of People, and have since been promoted to People Director. And one of the asks of me when I joined was, we need some values and we need to change our culture. And Brain in Hand, just to give you a little bit of background, only employed about 30 people pre-pandemic. And then we experienced quite extreme growth during the pandemic. And we now employ just over 100 people directly, and we've got about 40 contractors working for us as well. So the business went through a very rapid phase of growth, and actually is a very different organisation now to the one it was before I joined. Now, I've been in HR for quite some time, and I know that values work can be done well and it can be done not so well. And I really wanted to create a model in Brain in Hand where we were doing it with the organisation, not to. And also there's often that sense of culture's the responsibility of the people team, but actually it's not. It's the responsibility of everybody in the organisation, but the people team create the framework and the tools to enable the culture change. So that's where the idea of establishing a Values Champions group came from. This idea of having conduits in the business who could help us really drive and shape our culture. And we approached it at a company away day last year, where we'd done quite a bit of consultation around our values, what we thought our organizational values could be, and then the values champions helped us with the next phase of work in terms of feedback into teams and helping shape those values. Yeah, do you want me to talk a little bit about how we established the group, or
yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, how did they become your champions?
Yeah, so sort of linking into how Emma was speaking just now about a possible approach. So Brain in Hand has quite a, I guess people would describe it as perhaps having a bit of a family feel, but we are sort of shifting our management style a little bit to be a bit more aligned with some of our commercial objectives. But I felt the approach in Brain in Hand, because this was quite new, and also there are people who are incredibly passionate about what we do and the users that we support. So we invited volunteers, and so we had people volunteer to become values champions. That was just under a year ago now. And actually from that voluntary group, we had a reasonable mix of people from across the business and at different levels of the organisation. So it felt like the right group at that point in time. As the programme of work has progressed, some colleagues have deselected themselves because they felt either the values champion role isn't for them, or they don't want to make that commitment. Some people, for whatever reason, didn't feel entirely connected with the nature of the work we were doing, so deselected for that reason. So we've got a pretty strong group of people now that we work with and that do genuinely champion the work that we do. But I do think, if I could share one bit of advice, you still have to lead and nurture that group of people. I think I stepped back a bit from the group for a period of time, and actually the group didn't didn't lose its way, but lost a little bit of its purpose. And actually only this morning Katie and I have been on a call with our values champions, just redefining their purpose for our next phase of the culture change programme, and it felt like people were with us and connected and asking questions about how they could be involved and what role they could play going forward. So a lesson learned is, even though you can get that really committed group of people helping you drive the culture change, it still needs that sort of ongoing purpose defined and clarity of roles defined, so that people can go away from the values champion sessions and make a difference at a team level. So
brilliant, thank you, Lucy. That's a really, really good bit of advice there. What would you say have kind of like been the biggest wins for you in terms of having champions help you with this piece of work?
I think two things really. One, on an organizational level, it links really closely to the networks that Emma was describing. There are people now in pockets of the organization at lots of different levels, communicating and using the language of our values and our behaviors, and essentially advocating and being ambassadors for the culture change programme. So that's the win on an organizational level. For me personally, we're a really small people team. It's myself, a people business partner, and an HR advisor. And when, I'm sure people who've worked in-house can relate, it can be quite an isolated place to be in the people team because of the nature of our role. So actually, the fact that I feel like there's a team of people with me on this, and helping, drive the message and drive the culture change, is actually quite a supportive place to be, as a people director as well. So
that's lovely. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it like that, but yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Karen, I'm going to come to you now, if I may. You obviously were integral to developing a huge amount of champions at the MOJ. Can you tell us a bit more about that, and again sort of how you recruited them and the number? It was you had quite a big team there, didn't you?
Yeah, so we started, so we're one of the, well, actually, we're the third largest government department, and it's actually, it's a bit of a I like to call it, it's like minestrone soup. It's a bit of an amalgamation of different areas. It's formed from ex-Home Office and the Department of Constitutional Affairs. We've also now got His Majesty's Prisons and Probation Service, Legal Aid Agency, Office of the Public Guardian, Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority. We had over 80,000 people, a 10 billion budget to deliver justice, over 9 million customers in 900 plus locations, 40 different sets of terms and conditions, which is absolutely crazy, a really challenging climate, which has probably got even more challenging, and over 20 variations in values and beliefs. So trying to bring all of that together to get everybody saying we are one MOJ. We've been doing this for 10 years, and be honest, we're still not quite there yet. But what we did was we came from off the back of the Engage for Success report, and obviously the biggest thing in there being employee voice. How can we enable the employee voice of those 80,000 people? And the engagement team, as it then was, which was only had 3 people in it, set up a way to support the MOJ to ask, analyse and act. So what are we asking about people's experience? How are we analysing it to pull that insight, and then action? Most importantly, what are we actually going to do about it? Obviously, we had some challenges. So we had different sets of people in the organisation. We had some people that are like, well, you know, that's really not for me. We had some people, well, I've been here for years, I'm quite cynical, seen it before, it doesn't really work. We had the people that I just come to work here. But then it was about identifying some supporters. So I'm here, what is it that you need me to do? And we needed those supporters to find our advocates, to find our champions. And our champions were going to be the ones that were actually going to make it all happen. So in September of 2008, we actually launched our engagement strategy, which was called Starting a Chain Reaction. And the network was kind of born from that, a launch event of over 100 people who were asked to go out into the business and then identify those change advocates. So we very much started from an identification perspective. It has grown since then. We get people now self-volunteering to be part of it. We get people that are, I'm stepping down, but here's someone who can actually take over from me. So it's very much kind of more organic now. We created a set of supporting material to help people, because the engagement, people were doing this on top of their day job. You know, we didn't have at the time engagement leads. So it was very much, you know, this is how much you kind of need in terms of facility time, and this is what's kind of expected of you within that role. And we did some development events. And then when Rob actually moved on from heading the network, I actually got the opportunity to head the network alongside Ruth Patel. And so Ruth and I took a very different approach from that. We wanted to take a little bit more of a step back and actually, what do our champions understand about engagement? So we came at it then from a very capability perspective. So we held a series, a summer program of events where we looked at, you know, engagement fundamentals. Do people know about Khan? Do people know about Aon Hewitt? Talking about communicating and influencing, all different subjects. But we asked the champions what it was that they actually wanted to learn. From that, we built an assessment tool. We built a practitioner's guide. We changed the structure of the network because, you know, working across all of those different agencies, we're still very much kind of siloed ways of working. So we moved to a more regional perspective where we tried to break down those silos and get people from the different parts of the organisation talking together. And the network now is over 1,400 people, which to support an organisation of 92,000 is, you know, it's almost 10% of the organisation as an engagement champion. But, you know, we're still very much trying to find our feet with it. So one thing I would say is, don't expect to think you're going to put a network in place and think in 6 months' time it's all going to be sorted. We've been doing this for like however many years, like 12, 13 years, and we're still not quite there yet. So, but we're now trying to focus more on employee experience. So taking that step back, understanding engagement is the output. So what is it that creates that great EX in order to make those changes, improve wellbeing, improve productivity? and where we've worked with the champions to develop our values. So it's really interesting hearing what Lucy was saying. We actually took a very similar approach. Yeah, you know, thinking about what creates a good day at work. So we've got the good day at work themes, and we are now working with the champions to build personas to help us understand a bit more about people's experience at work. So quite a lot there in a couple of minutes.
Amazing. God, it sounds like it's quite a big job, that one, with that many people and all the different elements, but really great. And just a reminder to everyone on the call, if you have any questions for any of our guests, do pop them in the chat. Karen, any other sort of do's and don'ts that you'd say during this? Obviously you say you've been doing it for some time now. Anything else that you've kind of learned along the way? Any other things that you would like to share?
I definitely think start with purpose. So we didn't start with a very clear purpose. And so the network for the first couple of years actually was a bit, well, what are they actually there to do? So we did lose quite a few people at the beginning because they wasn't quite sure what the ask of them was, and to continually develop that purpose as well. Because as the climate changes in the organisation, you've got to change along with it. In fact, really, champions can be the forerunners for explaining is what is going to be needed of the organisation in the future. So, you know, definitely use the network as the conduit that it's there for, to get the information from people in the organisation, because it's the people that actually drive change.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. And Ruth, so yes, you were working on the programme with Karen, but we're actually have you here today in a slightly different capacity. So you're now the chair of the Carers Network for CPS, a slightly different approach, a slightly different type of network. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so thanks, Katie, and thanks for the invite to the webinar. So yeah, I chair the CPS Carers Network. For those who don't know what CPS is, with Crown Prosecution Service, we're responsible for prosecuting criminal cases in England and Wales. A very frontline operational organisation of about 7,000 people, mainly lawyers and people operational like paralegals. So very frontline, very out there, kind of delivering justice for the public. The CPS Carers Network was set up originally in about 2018 by our previous chair, Linda, and it came out of us signing up to a carers charter, in which our organisation committed to creating the workplace as an environment where carers can balance working and their caring responsibilities, and somewhere where people can thrive and be supported by the organisation. And our ultimate objective of the network, I think, is actually quite similar in terms of any engagement network, employee experience network, is we're ultimately trying to shape the organisation to be a great place to work for our employees. So we've got long-term organisational effectiveness and good business performance. And with the Carers Network, it's ultimately that great place to work for our colleagues with caring responsibilities. So we've set that up in a way where it provides a safe space where people can come together, where our caring colleagues can come together and share their experiences, their ideas, their feedback, their concerns that they might have, and really connecting different people together across the business. So carers, a key thing we hear a lot about caring and having care responsibilities, sometimes you can feel like you're on your own. There's some loneliness, isolation. And so we're a regional organisation. We're based all across England and Wales. And having the network can help us connect people across those traditional boundaries of teams and regions and bring people together. And we really encourage peer-to-peer support. So we will have things like a newsletter where people can share their story. We'll have monthly calls where we can bring our members can join over a cup of coffee and talk about kind of what's going on in their lives at the moment. Incredibly informal calls and very supportive, where people will reach out and give each other tips. We also use it as a conduit to share information and anonymous feedback to the business, and I think this is where a diversity network can really influence change and wider change in improving employee experience through having our phone calls, our carers chats, and providing that safe space and really hearing directly from the people on the ground doing the job while they're balancing their caring responsibilities. We can capture that and anonymously feed it back through our diversity and inclusion team, through being approached through other business stakeholders as part of consultations, and then act as that real collective voice to identify things that we can do better, identify, well, actually these things are not going to work for this group of people. So that conduit for that employee voice has been a real key important thing. And ultimately, having that support where people can get that understanding of what our organisation can do to help them will help improve that employee experience. But getting that feedback to then feed into the business works both ways. It's a real good sense of two-way conversation. We've got about 105 members, so we're small. We are growing. It's Carers Week in a couple of weeks. Last Carers Week, the network grew by 13%. So we're going to see how much it grows again as more awareness of the network and more awareness of caring comes about. But it's not just for carers. We welcome anybody who wants to be an ally for carers, who maybe manages carers or might manage a carer in the future, potential carers. So we're open to everybody, but we have a very small committee. So we always say the network belongs to the members. So we very much encourage that personal sharing, but then we will have a very small committee where we can then feed back and act as that kind of point of contact for the business.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ruth. And I want to make sure there's still a little bit of time for any questions people might have, but just one last one from me. What would you say were your kind of do's and don'ts, or what would you say the key considerations might be when setting up a diversity network?
So you can tell me and Karen have worked together, because I'm about to say exactly the same as her. The purpose, I think, being really clear about your purpose and what is going to add most value for the group you support and represent and for the organisation. I think that is really key, and for a couple of reasons, really. It will help you plan your activity, especially when people are doing the kind of, whether it's a champion role or a membership role on top of their day job. It can be quite resource intensive and time consuming. So what are the things, where can you put all your resources and effort that are going to have maximum benefit for those people who you represent? But also it will then help gain that business buy-in about why you exist, what you can do to help the business to achieve its organisational aims. So every year we pull together a business plan and we really align it to our inclusion strategy, our people strategy, our overall organisation strategy. How are we helping the organisation deliver its business through a workforce where we can retain and attract the best talent from our caring community, where people can thrive and be productive, and using data to evidence that, I think, is really important as well. So it can be through your existing mechanisms. It can be through, for example, the conversations you have with the group you represent, like we do through our we call them Care for a Cuppa conversations, or through all the external data and resources out there. So, for example, we'll look at things like research from Carers UK or a vast amount of other organisations out there that then give us an indication of the trends and things that might be affecting carers in the workplace. And we can use that not just to shape the support we can give to our membership, but also to, I suppose, tip off the organisation of what might be coming, what might be challenges for the future that actually we can nip in the bud now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Big thank you to all three of our guests today. Really, really appreciate it. I'll hand back over now to Lee. I think we're going to have an open floor to see if there's any other questions that anyone might have.
Yeah, I've not seen many in the chat, but I've got a few of my own, if I may. I'm really interested, one of the things I've seen in the past is if you can get a really negative, almost activist individual, one of the sort of vocal minority who kind of criticises things, on board with a program like this, you can almost convert them and they become a really strong voice for change. Have any of you any experience of either selecting deliberately those sorts of individuals or them self-selecting into one of your groups and making a positive difference? Hope that makes sense. Karen, I think you were nodding, so can I pick on you to start
You
with?
can. Yeah, I've seen this quite a
Dangerous
lot.
to nod in front of me.
Yeah, I've seen this happen quite a lot. So we have got quite, and that's where I was talking about the cynics in the organisation. Actually, the cynics are really good advocates because they'll tell you exactly like it is, and if they're given the right platform in the right space to talk about it, then they do become advocates. So we did have our prison people. They're the biggest part of the organisation. In fact, they make up 10% of the entire civil service. They're a massive group of people, very union led. If you can't get this past the union, that's it. And we're quite often they won't come along. So if you go into an establishment to run an event and they won't be there, you're taking me away from doing my job. My job's so important. So to try and turn that around, there was one establishment that we visited, that we actually did a tour after the event and started speaking to people, and people were really, there was a couple of people that were really like, why are you here? What is it that you want to know? I don't do the staff survey, I don't trust it. But just by giving them that opportunity, well, we're here, tell us now, what changes it that you actually need? And then they start opening up, and they don't always come with the problems. They can be quite solution focused if you give them that platform in the right way.
Yeah, brilliant. Not without risk, is it? But it's
No,
can be
it can be quite
powerful.
risky, but it can be very powerful. Yeah.
Thank you. Another one, I think, from all of you really came through the sense that this is, it's something you've got to support over the long term. This isn't just a quick fix. It's something you've got to sustain over the long term. So how often is the right time to kind of refresh that network? Does it make sense to refresh that network, to bring new people in, to have a sort of set tenure for a champion role? Anyone want to put their hand up for that one? Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, I think it's about keeping the group open. Well, that's how we've approached it. So, as people have left the organisation and or joined the organisation, there's just a reminder that we have this values champion group. We often profile the work of the values champions and the culture change programme at our all staff meeting, and that's often followed up with a reminder that if people want to put themselves forward. And then actually what we recently noticed is the sort of representation, without it sounding too democratic, wasn't necessarily proportional. We had a team of 10 in our business, our client success team, and we had something like 6 values champions from the client success team. So we did scale back the number from that team, actually on the suggestion of the team manager, and then we've invited colleagues to join from other pockets of the business that weren't represented. So I think it's about recognizing it's a group that evolves and keeping its membership open as opposed to closed.
Yeah, that makes great sense. I mean, I think this is an interesting thing. There's a formality of having roles, but that doesn't mean it's kind of fixed in set in time. It's got to be a moldable, malleable thing. So yeah, really, really support that. Thank you. Emma, I think we've got time maybe for one last question before we wrap up. Anything from your side?
You caught me on the hop. No, I mean, I just looking at time, I think we're almost at time. I think it's, really, really good to hear, not really a question, more of a comment, but I think it's really good to hear the 3 different stories, because I think they're all so different from, small organisation on values, huge to the other end of the scale, which is MOJ on engagement, and then the sort of the diversity type of network from the sort of the carers network. And I think for me, it just illustrates the different creative ways that you can use the power of your people. And it's, really fascinating to hear about, the different ways that people are using employee networks. I know that, I know from the work we've done with the MOJ, there's lots of different networks in the MOJ and lots of different sort of strands going there. But I think it's just really useful just to hear about the different different ways you can use a network. It isn't just, don't just think it's just about, you know, enabling change. They're great for enabling change, but it can also be about bringing, you know, certain tribes of people together, certain groups of people together, so they don't, to really kind of reinforce that belonging piece, that inclusion piece. I think that's really great to hear about that side of things as well. So that's just a comment from me, really.
Yeah, I echo all of that, and I think, you know, from with an employee experience hat on, if EX is all about becoming human-centered and much more employees focused, these networks, champions, advocates, whatever you want to call them, have got to play a critical role in that. So I think we're going to see much more of this in the future. And yeah, it's a fascinating subject. And thank you to our three guests. Thank you, Emma, for lifting the lid on that. It's been enlightening. Thank you, Katie, for running the show, keeping us to time, and all of the help behind the scenes on this. And thanks to everyone for joining. Look out for the recording and the blog post over the coming days. We'll send that by email. You can also access it on LinkedIn, the EX Space LinkedIn site, People Lab, and other places to be named. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the day. I see someone's got their hand up. Laura, if you have got your hand up for a reason, then feel free to unmute and ask a question if it's just accidental. Oh, you have. Hi.
Hi, Laura. Oh, you're muted, I think, Laura.
Sorry. Just a really quick question. I've just joined a business just 10 weeks ago, and I've got a big culture problem. And this is one of my priorities. Lucy is very similar to your situation, I think. Is there any chance that I could contact you or email you just to have a chat, if possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just going to type in the
Lovely.
chat that I'm happy to connect with
Oh, thank you.
you on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
So
Thanks
yes,
so
by all
much.
means do.
really
Brilliant.
appreciate that. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad we caught you
Lucy.
before
Thanks
we
for that.
wrapped up. Cheers,
Thanks a
guys.
lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank
Have a great
you.
day. See you all soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.